Thursday the 13th of February. Great to have you with us on Hooked on Sport. I'm Wallace Long. In this episode, we'll see what's caught Hooky's eye this week, including his local SA sports wrap. Our guest is Travis Wakeling, who will be joining Hooky to talk SA cricket. G'day, Hooky.
Wallace, good morning and great to be catching up with you once again. Test series complete. A couple of South Australians have performed admirably. Travis Head, Alex Carey. I'll chat to Travis Wakeling about those lads. But what another exciting week for South Australian sport. The Sheffield Shield team's going well. The 36ers are in a play-in final tonight. Adelaide United continue to track along nicely. So, yeah, we got a lot to be proud of at the moment here in the mighty tricolour state, mate.
We certainly do, and it certainly cooled down after yesterday's second highest temperature recorded in February ever.
I went for a run at midday yesterday.
You're crazy, mate. You are crazy.
That was silly. Mind you, I picked some shady streets, which was made it tolerable, but yeah, it was unpleasant to be out in the afternoon, that's for sure.
Okay, well, let's look at the topics for this week. Ken Hinkley to depart Port. What do you make of it?
Yeah, so he's going to coach for one more year and then hand the reins to Josh Carr. I tell you what, Ken Hinkley being not so much moved on, but this decision comes against the backdrop that since he has taken over as coach of Port Adelaide in 2013, he is third for most wins as a coach in that era. The only two clubs who've had more wins than him are Sydney and Geelong. And even the last 5 years, he is third for most wins behind Brisbane and Geelong. Now, if you take those last 5 years, Chris Fagan and Chris Scott, no one's talking about them as maybe needing to move on. I mean, they have been great servants of their clubs for long periods, and no one would be thinking for a second that those two should be moving on. Now, yes, I understand the big difference between those two is that they're premiership coaches, but Ken Hinkley's record is exceptional, and it is, in isolation, difficult to comprehend that a club kind of looks like they're keen to move on. We can understand why, because they haven't achieved that ultimate success, and that's how Port Adelaide measures it by its own benchmark of premierships in the past. But that would be point number one that I would make. Point number two is that this is not a group that seems tired of Ken Hinkley as coach. Yes, they've put in some poor performances, but whenever Ken has had his back to the wall, when he's been under real pressure, his players have stood up for him. Yep. So that relationship, to me, seems as strong as it ever has. So there are a couple of things that in isolation I say, this is unusual. This is is this hasty? Maybe is this unnecessary? But then at the same time, I do understand the situation that Port has found themselves in. They are feeling like that the Ken Hinkley era is over, that it is time to move on. There is an appetite for change amongst the supporter base. And I do believe that if that is the case, then going down this road does provide Ken with the dignity that he has probably earned to be able to move on in this manner. The alternative is, let's say that Port Adelaide gets to about round 15 and they are 6 wins, 9 losses. It's almost inevitable that he would get moved on at that particular juncture. And that, I think, would be unreasonable for a man who has created so much success for that club. So I do feel like that there is some dignity in the way this is being handled. Then I'll come back to one negative. Josh Carr, very, very good coach. I think he'll do a wonderful job, but he kind of does live in the Ken Hinkley shadow. I mean, he has been his assistant coach for a number of years, and by making this decision, Port Adelaide has ruled itself out of chasing any of the big-name coaches that are potentially going to be available. So your former coach, John Longmire, potentially could be on the market at the end of this coming season. Adam Simpson, another premiership coach, could be available. Nathan Buckley, a favourite son of Port Adelaide, would potentially be available. And they've ruled themselves out of all of those because they've gone chips in on Josh Carr. And that is, it's a bold decision to make, but it certainly has restricted them from looking at every possible scenario by going down this road of appointing him now for 2026. So in amongst all of that, probably the one thing I would say is that I am glad that Ken Hinkley is going to get one more full year, and a full year without the distraction of should he be moved on, should he not. It will be the final foray with a group that you can tell that he still has a good relationship with.
LIV Golf this weekend, Hooky. You looking forward to it?
Yeah, can't wait. What an incredible event it's been, third time around, from nothing. You think about 3 years ago, there was no such thing as any sort of professional golf tournament in South Australia. We didn't have an SA Open. And an SA Open, I think the last time we held it was in about 2006. We have had the WebEx Series events recently, but LIV has been something that has blown me away. It almost reminds me of when the Big Bash started in South Australia, and suddenly we were getting 50,000 people turn up to a domestic cricket match. To think that we would get 100,000 people turning up to professional golf here in Adelaide is quite incredible. The weather's going to be ideal. They've landed on their feet there. There is growing popularity for the sport here in South Australia. I think there's a number of reasons for that we can explore, but I'm so excited by it. And I think that in as much as I reckon it still has some challenges and some things that it needs to iron out, it has been just another event that has put South Australia on the international map, and that's something we should be really proud of.
So what's made it so successful?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do really feel like Australia in general and Adelaide in particular is a unique market. We've been starved of the top end of golf, and you go back, this is pretty much on the PGA Tour, but they developed a wraparound season which sort of blew the Australian Open and the Australian Summer out of the water. If you remember, we had the Australian PGA, the Australian Masters and the Australian Open. The PGA and the Open have survived but really shrunk as international events. They just don't attract the big names like even they were 10 years ago when Rory McIlroy and Jordan Spieth were coming to town. And then Masters has been wiped off the planet altogether. That was a traditional event that was held at Huntingdale every year, and that has just fallen by the wayside completely. So we've been starved of the top end. The game's very popular here, Wallace, golf, but it's also very cheap here. If you go to Asia and go and pay a green fee to play one of the better courses in Asia, well, you are paying, potentially north of $500, and we don't really have any sense that that's what it costs to play golf here in Australia, unless maybe you turn up at Royal Melbourne without a member, then you're going to pay something in that vicinity, but that's really about it. In other parts of the world as well, it's an elite sport. It's an elitist sport. And I don't really feel like that's the case here in South Australia. We have golf courses that cater to every demographic, every walk of life. Yes, you can go play at Kooyonga or Royal Adelaide or Glenelg or Grange where LIV is hosted, but equally you can go and play at the Pat or North Adelaide or one of the really good quality tier 2 courses that we have around suburban Adelaide, or even some of the places like Mawson Lakes or Campbelltown or North Haven. These little par 3 courses, a lot of them are, or 9-hole courses that aren't absolutely architecturally acclaimed, but they're great places for people to learn and play the game of golf. And so I think it's a real egalitarian feel here in South Australia, the way golf operates. And so social players are here because they see it as a support that's accessible and available to them. And that's not what it necessarily plays out like in the rest of the world. And that's why I think it found its real niche here in Adelaide.
So what are the challenges?
Yeah, amazing for me to say that as much as it's been so incredibly popular here, LIV Golf in general is being largely ignored by the rest of the world. And I query how that's come about because, look, the top 20 players in the LIV field are genuinely world class. Bryson DeChambeau might be the game's most engaging player right now. So here are the things that I query about LIV. And this is probably my first point would be something that for every breakaway league it struggles with. It has to mean something. Elite sport has to mean something. It can't just be someone wins and they're wealthy and they become even wealthier. So I don't think LIV has any meaning behind what it's doing right now. No one's playing for a famous trophy. No one's playing for anything other than cash. There's no real prestige. I don't know that anyone would be across who has been LIV's greatest ever player. I mean, you can go back through and look at Brooks Koepka's won 5 times, John Rahm's won 2 or 3, Taylor Gooch has won a couple, Cameron Smith's won a couple. But I mean, people rock up to LIV. I would say 5% might know that it was Brendan Steele who won last year. 5% might know that it was Taylor Gooch who won the year before, having shot a pair of 62s on the first 2 days. There's no sense of history about this tournament. And like I said, that's always the case for a breakaway league, but they need to start to add some sort of definition and meaning. And I was having a think about this. Can you name me one LIV trophy? So this goes all around the world to some famous golfing parts, and I don't think there's one named LIV trophy. So why is LIV Adelaide's trophy for the individual winner not named after a famous Australian player? The obvious one would be Greg Norman. Why is there not a Greg Norman trophy? Maybe it should be named after Jack Newton. Now, he never won a major, Jack, but he was a huge contributor to the game, particularly in later life with juniors. David Graham won 2 major titles, won a PGA Championship in 1979 and a US Open famously in 1981. Wayne Grady won a PGA in 1990. Now, I understand there's a lot of guys that are still aligned with the PGA Tour and they're going to be a difficult sell. But imagine the prestige of playing for, the David Graham Trophy or the Greg Norman Trophy. I think that's something to think about. Then number 2, we need to make this an elite contest. I just reckon this is a bit too much of a bromance, this type of event for me. They have teams, and I get they have teams, and I understand why, and I think that's something that they should lean into. But in the opening round on Friday, all of the teams will play together as a team. So the captain of Ripper is Cameron Smith, but the other 3 members of the Ripper team, they'll actually play together as a trio. And I'm really uncomfortable with that. I mean, the rule of golf suggests that you are not supposed to, in an individual stroke event, help another player, because by helping another player, you're disadvantaging the rest of the field. But here we've got 3 guys who are all relying on each other to score well so that by the end of the week, they're in contention for the team's championship. So if we're really serious about this being a prestigious individual competition, having it all starting where all the teams play together, that's rubbish to me. I just cannot come at that at all. And I think it is flirting dangerously with not only the rules of golf, but the spirit of the sport. And it's one of the reasons why I can understand why there's a reluctance from the OWGR to give them world rankings points. We understand there are a whole other list of issues at play there, but that is something I'm really uncomfortable with, the way that's structured. If you're enjoying this podcast, I'd encourage you to take a listen to Beyond the Club. It's a project I've been working on with Flinders University. Now I co-host it with Professor Sam Elliott, and we break down all the latest research on how to maximise the experience of junior and club athletes. There's a range of resources, special guests, and cutting-edge info on how you can make your club a safer, happier place for your kids and their club mates. Beyond the Club, wherever you get your podcasts.
One of the key things is for LIV is they haven't been able to really secure what we'd call a traditional TV deal. How is the one that negotiating in the US tracking?
So they're on Fox Sports now. That deal landed around about 6 weeks ago, Wallace. It's far better than the deal that they had with the CW app, which is a uniquely American thing, which seemed to show reruns of TV shows from, 30, 40 years ago. It's an interesting deal. I don't think it's worth a heck of a lot of money, but they're hoping that they can get eyeballs onto it. Their numbers for the tournament in Riyadh last week, which was played under lights to try and get into the midday to 2:30, 3 p.m. window in the US, were horrendously flat. They started on Fox Sports 2, and look, I'm not an expert on this, but I do believe that there are a lot of people in the US who buy Fox Sports 1 and don't necessarily pay for the upgrade package for the secondary channel. So they spent most of their time on the opening day on Fox Sports 2. They did 12,000 viewers according to the Nielsen ratings. I mean, that is a disaster in any market, in particular in the US, when you compare that against the PGA Tour, which is struggling with numbers of around 2 million. I mean, 12,000. In fact, the PGA Tour was taking the mickey out of them because they were hosting the Waste Management Phoenix Open, where the 16th hole there, the par 3, the stadium hole, which is the watering hole, is a copy of what they do at the Phoenix Open. There was 24,000 just on that 16th hole alone, while there's 12,000 people watching the Vision on Fox Sports. But the other thing I would suggest to LIV Adelaide, I mean, if you are if you're so reliant on a US TV deal, you've got to get it in the right part of the right time slot. So we're starting on Friday, which is, well, that's tomorrow now. I think it starts at 1:45, the scheduled play. Now, that's around about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night on a Thursday in the US. And Wednesday night. And Thursday night. That's right. And I would contend that's too late. And I don't think it would be a problem with anyone if they actually started play at, say, 11 o'clock in Adelaide and allow that vision to go back into the US at sort of 7:30 at night and really pick up the prime time coverage. So, yeah, sometimes you've got to help yourself to help where you ultimately need to be, and that's by starting to build up the US TV deal, because without it, LIV really, they've got a bottomless pit of money. It's a little bit different to what we've seen with traditional breakaway leagues, but they're never going to be successful without pandering to a US television audience.
Okay, we've got the Adelaide 36ers, and they've had an up and down season. How do you rate their chances tonight versus Sydney?
I strangely feel like they've got a really good chance. They've got an excellent record against the Sydney Kings this year, and they're playing for a little bit as well. Jason Cadee has announced that he's going to retire from the league at the end of this season. He's played 422 games, and he's been just a great servant of the game. So I'm sure the Sixers want to send him out on a high. It seems like Montrezl Harrell, who is the famous NBA star who's come and played in the NBL for the Adelaide 36ers, he suggested that he wants to come back to the NBL next year. That heightens everyone's excitement. Jarrell Martin is back from a calf injury, and so he'll suit up tonight, which is big for the Adelaide 36ers. Then on top of that, Xavier Cooks, the Sydney Kings forward/centre, has been provisionally suspended after an adverse drug test in the last few weeks. So Adelaide comes in full strength. Sydney has some challenges and some wobbles around it. So it adds up to a great opportunity, doesn't it? And who knows, Adelaide might be able to extend their season. If they don't, I think you would have to ask the question, at what cost has a sixth place finish in a 10-team league come at? Sack that coach, Scott Ninnis, before the season had even started. The way that was handled was miserable. The way that left a really sour taste in the mouth of a number of the other past players around that group who are mates with Scott, I think is indefensible. And it's going to take a heck of a lot for this organisation to win back that love of not just their fan base has been very, very loyal, but there are people who matter in South Australian basketball that have their nose out of joint with the Adelaide 36ers now. And I would contend if they finish in sixth position by losing tonight, that is going to be something that by any measure would be difficult to justify.
Great, Hooky. Time to look at local SA sport. What's caught your eye this week?
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on. I'm really impressed with a young 16-year-old kid, Sarah Mildren, tennis player. She's dominated a couple of J100 events over there in Tasmania. She played in the Australian Open singles just a week or two ago, but she's gone over to Tasmania. She's won the singles and doubles in the Burnie leg of these 2 weekends, and then lost the final of the singles and won the doubles in the Launceston event. So these are J100 events, so reasonably high ranking events for junior tennis. So she's now reached her highest rank in junior tennis of 161. It's not just a flash in the pan either, Wallace. So she won an Australian Junior Championship in Bendigo back in December. She didn't lose a set on the way through to winning that tournament. And she won an ITF Junior event in China last year. She plays with local club Glen Lee. She's been part of the last 2 state league premierships. They've won 5 in a row, Glen Lee, so they're a story in their own right. Shaping as one of the great dynasty clubs of South Australian sport at the moment. But yeah, Sarah Mildren. Look, I understand it's a very, very competitive market, junior tennis, but Sarah Mildren just seems to be continually putting her name up in lights, and she'll be one to watch.
Hooky, the Australian Golf Opens to split again.
Yeah, they are, Wallace. So 3 years running where they've run them as joint events, if you like. So that was, 22, 23, 24. But for 2025, we are going back to separate events. Yeah, mixed emotions on this. The public has been very, very lukewarm on the joint events. And I can kind of understand why. It's very difficult to follow with the television coverage. There's not a heap of cameras. They're trying to run 3 events at once because they run an all abilities event as well. And it can be confusing to sort of follow where everyone's at, in particular if 2 events are tight in the stretch. So the television audience has been off it. The players don't love it either. I think the male players who are in the better time slot, they do feel like the course is set up a little bit too easy because they've got to cater for women being able to stop balls in certain parts of the green and pin placements. There's a whole host of things that are going on there, and Cam Smith certainly vented about that ahead of the last event that was at Kingston Heath and Victoria. So, yes, it is going to segregate. The women would prefer their event to be in February because it gets away from the US Tour season. One thing that hasn't been thought about is now you've got to get double your volunteers, and you've got to get all of your tournament referees who do this for nothing and travel for nothing to go and turn up to 2 events. So I don't think everyone's quite thought through the amount of logistics that go into putting 2 separate Golf Australia events on. And whenever the women have been left to their own devices, it has often been at the detriment to the women's event. I think in the first 60 years of the Women's Australian Open, it wasn't played like 23 times. I might just check those numbers, but certainly around 1/3 of them weren't played because there just wasn't a capacity to pay for it when no television broadcast is going to pay for it. The expense to the revenue just wasn't there. So I do fear for the long term, the Women's Australian Open will be an event long term. I mean, Golf Australia will never turn their back on it, but it is going to be a very, very tough sell to do anything other than make a huge loss out of it. So here's what I think will happen. Go on.
Do you think that there will ever be, we'll ever see it back in Adelaide?
Yeah, I do. I think that's a possibility. In fact, I reckon Malinauskas and James Sutherland had a conversation potentially about it this week. Obviously, James Sutherland, Golf Australia, is in town. My best guess is that, and this is an educated guess, but I reckon the men's event will go to Royal Melbourne. First time it's been back at Royal Melbourne in 25 years. I think we'll see that at the end of this year. And I just reckon it makes sense for the Women's Australian Open to have a stint in Perth. We haven't sent a national championship to Perth, I think, in a generation, maybe 30 years.
Wow.
These events should be mobile. They should be able to travel around Australia. And the fact that Hannah Green and Minjee Lee, both out of Western Australia, I think would like to see it at home. Whether the logistics of getting it all the way over there can happen is possible, I think, is a question mark. But I would be surprised if we're not back somewhere in that rotation sooner rather than later.
And I suppose the other thing too, larger fields, great opportunity for South Australian amateurs to get an opportunity.
Correct, yeah. So if you link up with a European or a US tour, that does knock out a fair few of the spare spots in the field. But the Women's Australian Open at the moment has only run with around about a field of 100, whereas the men has been a full field of about 150 odd. So, yeah, it's a great opportunity for young women and girls to test themselves in that really high pressure environment of a national championship. So, as I said, there'll always be a place for it. But the one thing we have done by segregating it out is certainly made the Women's Australian Open, by nature of that, will become a bit of a poor cousin. And I do find that unfortunate.
And Hooky, to wrap us up, the Hockeyroos were in Sydney recently with a couple of Adelaide or South Australians starring in the Hockeyroos.
You were right, because they come from Adelaide Hockey Club. So we're talking about Hattie Shand and Lucy Sharman, who are both part of the current Hockeyroos squad, both from the Adelaide Peas Hockey Club. It's only down the road from me, Wallace, just on Green Hill Road there. The one thing I think is amazing about hockey as a sport here in South Australia is so many country kids make their way to the top. I've never quite understood that. I keep asking those who have made their way to the top, and they think that you're growing up on the uneven surfaces, playing on fairly unkempt grass in country zones, actually augurs them really well for being able to deal with the bumps and bruises of international sport. But pretty much all of them have come via the Adelaide Hockey Club. So as I said, Hattie Shand, Lucy Sharman, both playing for or from Adelaide right through to the Hockeyroos now. Hattie Shand comes from a farm outside of Narracourt. Lucy Sharman comes from a little town down in the southeast as well called Kalangadoo. And if you go back 10 years ago, Then two of the stars of the Hockey Roos are actually both out of the Riverland. So Carrie McMahon, a defender, and Georgie Parker, a striker, both went to the Olympic Games. They were from Adelaide Hockey Club on the way through to the Hockey Roos as well. So I just reckon that's an interesting little quirk that so many of our country kids are the ones who go on and play for Australia. Tom Wickham was also from the Riverland, spent some time in Alice Springs as well. He's the last male Hockey Roo that we've seen for a while. And then the only other one of note who's a city kid is Jane Claxton, who came out of the Burnside Club. But yeah, very, very heavily South Australian country kids making their way to the top in hockey.
Good stuff, Hooky. Travis Wakeling joins us after the break.
You're listening to Hooked on Sport with Ben Hook and Wallace Long. Our attention turns to cricket across all levels here in South Australia. To do that is the voice of South Australian cricket to join us. And I know what you're all going to say. Most people think Laurie Colliver is the voice of South Australian cricket. They probably even accuse me of being the voice of South Australian cricket. But we have a new sheriff in town. His name is Travis Wakeling. He is one of the all-time great local sport callers, doing a wonderful job across the South Australian and the Premier Cricket competitions. He's a producer with SEN in his spare time. He has been good enough to join us and give his expert opinion on all things cricket. And he joins us now. Travis, welcome to Hooked on Sport.
Hooky, what an absolute pleasure, mate. And that's I don't think I will ever get a better introduction than that. So I'll save that and keep it in the memory bank. But it's nice to be after a year of commentary. It's been a fun year so far, and loving being as involved in sport as I can possibly be.
We're very grateful to have you here joining us, my man. Let's start at the top, shall we? Travis Head, Alex Carey, even Nathan McSweeney are part of what has been an epic performance from the Australians over there in Sri Lanka. 2-0 in the Test series. A little bit of a wobble last night, the one-dayers. But, I mean, really they were there to win the Test series and they did it emphatically. Let's just focus in on the two South Australians, Head and Carey, who, in particular, Alex Carey, was just exceptional for those two Tests.
Oh, he has been unbelievable, hasn't he? And this hasn't been an overnight thing with Alex Carey. What people don't understand is he has built a really solid foundation for his career from the day he walked in, even to the one-day setup in 2018, 2019. But he just, it was so nice. I look at the summer and I go, I think he probably wasted quite a few starts. He was making a lot of 20s, 30s, 40s, made a nice 70 as well. But he deserved 100, probably more than anyone else who played in that summer, and boy, oh boy, was it exciting to see him go big, not just make 100, make a big 100, and score himself a player of the match. So well deserved, and it couldn't happen to a better bloke.
Josh Inglis should be ahead of Alex Carey as the wicketkeeper in the Test team. They took a bit of a hit after a positive first Test. Geez, they've taken a few steps backward with what Alex did in that second Test.
Oh, have they ever? I see. I've had a look at this because I'm quite passionate about this debate. And so Inglis has been on nearly every Test tour since 2022. So that was actually the last time Australia went to Sri Lanka. Josh Inglis went as the reserve wicketkeeper then. I don't know if you remember, but Alex Carey had a really good series because he's so well suited to those to that environment. But he has obviously taken over the white ball position during the World Cup last year. You look at the numbers. Alex Carey averages 10 more than Josh Inglis does in one-day cricket, even for international one-day cricket. So, I mean, obviously Carey was playing in the one-day international last night. I feel like that was more to do with Inglis being rested, that he wasn't playing. But I would have Alex Carey as the first-choice keeper any day of the week in that side. And in the Test match arena, he's the highest averaging wicketkeeper batter since Gilchrist. And to be honest, Hooky, I actually think he's the best wicketkeeper we've had since Ian Healy. What do you think about that?
Oh, gee, so you've got him ahead of Gilchrist?
With the gloves. I think he's sensational. He doesn't miss a beat.
Yeah, gee, that's a big call. I mean, Gilchrist spent a lot of time keeping to Shane Warne very successfully, and I would argue that keeping to Shane Warne would have been a super challenge, and in particular for someone like Gilchrist, who was a tall guy. I don't know that I could necessarily have him ahead of Gilchrist, even as an outright glover. He's very, very good. He is certainly our number one. I've been stunned by the concept that he doesn't necessarily have a mortgage on that spot, and that there has been a push for Josh Inglis to take over that role. And I think Alex with everything that he has done, even going right back to, here's a point I would make. I don't know that anyone else in world cricket completes the run out of Johnny Bairstow in the test at Lords almost 2 years ago now. It's hard to believe it's that far back, but that was, if you go back to that, Cameron Green bowled a bouncer that left his hand at about 135 kilometres an hour. It died in the wicket. It was basically had to take it as a half volley, which he took on one knee and then got up and threw the ball straight away and threw the stumps down. That is all of those skills that he put together to actually hit the stumps, I think is beyond anyone else in world cricket. So, yeah, I am always fascinated by this discussion that Josh Inglis should be taking over that role. And I think Carey has underlined how far ahead of the rest of the field that he is right now.
He certainly has. And I think he'll continue to do that. What I'm hoping is that innings in Sri Lanka was a real stepping stone for him to realise just how good he is at test level. His batting form has been supreme for 12 months now, since that knock in New Zealand where Pat Cummins robbed him of 100, a match-winning 100, which would have been unbelievable. It's funny how we don't really talk about it now because he finished on 98, not out.
Yeah.
But if that was 100 and he won us that game when we were absolutely staring down the barrel of a loss against New Zealand. So he has been absolutely supreme. Comes back to Shield. I love his attitude. I love that. The minute he stops playing with Australia, he comes back and he plays for South Australia and the Adelaide Strikers. That is exactly the type of character that he is, that he wants to come back and look after his state and perform well for South Australia. So I just think Alex Carey is our long-term wicketkeeper. He's still, I think he's 32, 33 years of age. He's got 4 or 5 years ahead of him still and right at the top of his game as well.
We could prattle on about him for hours, and we're getting into the tall weeds here with him. Just a couple of things that he's done twice now. One thing that he's done twice now that I've noticed and stood out to me, he was at the non-strikers end when Steve Smith brought up his 100. And I don't know if you noticed in the foreground, he's giving the double fist pump.
He was pumped.
Now, go back to South Australia versus Queensland in what I reckon might have been the second or third Sheffield Shield game of the summer. And Henry Hunt brought up his 100 by smacking one out over deep mid-wicket. And Alex Carey, exactly the same, celebrating someone else's individual milestone because he knew, A, how much it meant to the team, but it meant so much to him that one of his teammates had done particularly well. So, yeah, look, we could talk about him for hours. I've played club cricket with him. You probably know the story that I was the one who told him about how to run out Johnny Bairstow. There's a story for another day there, Trav. Let's move on. Travis Head, undoubtedly the player of the Australian summer, didn't quite do as much as we would have hoped against Sri Lanka. What did you make of him as an opener over there?
It's interesting, isn't it? The age-old debate that we're now getting in Australian cricket, where do we go for courses selection policy, or do we just select our team, our best team, and stick with it? I personally think he's a number 5, and I think that the great batters, and this is a challenge to Trav, he's a sensational batter, but the great batters are able to adapt to different conditions without having to necessarily shuffle around the order. And I think it would be better for Australian cricket long term if we were able to identify that opening batter, put them in place and leave them there. Now, I understand that we're probably in a position in Australian cricket where we haven't necessarily had an opening batter scream out that they are the next for us. I thought Constas was the one. I still think that Boxing Day innings is one for the ages, and not necessarily, yes, there was a bit of luck involved, but just the amount of confidence that he showed and the skill. We need to invest in Sam Constas. We need to give him time. And I think that the opportunity to play him in Sri Lanka was there ahead of an Indian tour in 2 years' time, which you would think that he's going to feature in. So, look, I think Trav does a great job as opener, and he's proven that. I mean, 98 runs at 32 for the series, but his strike rate was 115. And I think he actually set the tone for the entire series with that first innings knock in Gaul, first test, 57 off 40. It then set the platform for the other batters to go on and make huge scores. So it does make a difference having someone like that. But I do think that for the longevity of Australian cricket and progression as a team, we need to find our next permanent opener and stick them there.
If you're part of the marketing crew and you can just weasel your way into selection, Sam Constas plays every test from here, doesn't he? I mean, George Bailey and Andrew McDonald have no sense of what the fans want. They just completely focused in on how to cobble together a win, and it's hard to argue with. But my word, yeah, Sam Constas not being picked after what he did only 2 tests ago in Melbourne was a bit of a surprise. I do think differently to you with Travis, even to the point that I don't think he needs to be specifically a number 5 either way. So I don't think he needs to go up the order when the conditions. I do think he should go up the order when conditions are conducive to it. I also would put him down the order when you're Perth first innings and the wicket's really tough to bat on. I would send Webster or Carey in before him and just allow those guys to take a bit more of the heat of the new ball off before you can bring Travis in when the conditions become a bit more like level pegging. So it's an interesting debate though, isn't it? It's unusual that you would be thinking like that, but I've certainly changed my tune. I was always a bit of a belief that your top 6 should stay exactly rigidly as they are, but Travis has changed my thinking, to be honest. I do believe that if Australia loses 3 wickets in the first 15 overs, we should send the number 6 in. And if we lose 1 wicket in the first 50 overs, then Travis should bat 4. That's probably my mentality around it. And I imagine I'll get some arguments from that with plenty of people, including a sensible person like you. What did you make about, and I brought up this with Wallace last week, and I'm interested in your thoughts on it. Crash Craddock, journalist of great repute with News Limited, intimated that maybe Travis Head should never captain Australia. On the basis that he is such a free spirit, and would you curtail his capacity to play the game with such free abandon, if you like, if you made him captain of the Australian Test team? I think that would be a mistake, but I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I am a parochial South Australian, Hooky, but
I can hear a but coming.
I can tend to agree with Crash. Now, the reason is, I mean, I consume every bit of media that I possibly can. And once I've finished with the Hooked on Sports series, I try to look for another podcast that is, somewhere near as good as yours. And I stumbled across his episode on the Howie Games. Apologies, that's my dog barking in the background.
Get him in. I want his opinion as well.
But look, he basically said in this podcast, look, I'll do it if they want me to, but I'm really happy being a vice captain and supporting Pat and Steve. And he spoke a lot about his family and how time away from the game is really important to him. And I think that's what has helped him find this great balance in he looks so relaxed when he comes to the crease now. And when he first started in the Test team, and even in his some innings for South Australia, he just looked like he had a little bit of the weight of the world on his shoulders. And it's like since he's come back in for that Ashes Test to start the summer 2021, when he scored that massive ton against England and took that series by storm, he's just looked a different player. He's looked relaxed. And I think he's an excellent vice captain. And he's, I heard what you said last week about him, and, a great leader. And I think Australia would really bode well to a Travis Head-led side because of his old school style. But in saying that, I think his best cricket's been played the last 2 to 3 years. He's got a young family. He seems to have a really good balance in his life. And whilst there's other options around like Steve Smith, who genuinely wants to be the captain, not all the time, but, you look to the Sri Lankan series, he wanted to captain the side in Sri Lanka because he loves it. And I think if Head wanted to be a captain of Australia, he would have got the job in Sri Lanka, but he didn't. And I think he's going to still serve as an excellent vice captain. But I think that eventually it might go past him. And the current, I actually think the next long-term captain of Australia is outside of the existing side.
Look, your opinion's valid. I think that's perfectly reasonable. However, I hope he embraces it. I think your point's well made that he hasn't really demanded it. And sometimes in jobs like those, you have to stand up and make it your own. And Steve Smith clearly covets it. And he's done an exceptional job. I can't argue with that. But I would love to see Travis Head, the 48th captain of Australia. It all remains to be seen. Talking about captains, Nathan McSweeney, of course, returns to the South Australian team. They're in action today over in Perth against Western Australia in a one-day match. They're currently second in that series. McSweeney sort of arrived in the Australian team as a bit of a makeshift opener, got found out by Jasprit Bumrah, as did pretty much every Australian cricketer. Right now, Marnus Labuschagne's career seems to be hanging by a bit of a thread. I think that's probably a little bit more unfortunate than what it should be, because he's played some really important knocks in recent times for Australia, none more so than at the MCG when Australia won that really important test match. Where do you think McSweeney's at? Could he be stalking Marnus Labuschagne's position as really the only obvious candidate who bats 3 in Sheffield Shield cricket?
Yeah, well, for starters, I think Sam Constas owes Nathan McSweeney a beer or 5, because it really, at the start of the summer, it was between those two. Who was going to open the batting for Australia in Perth? And we could well have seen the reverse of that exact situation. If Constas went in for the first test and played the first 3, struggled in those conditions. You think about those 3 tests that McSweeney played. He played in Perth in a real bouncy, fast wicket. Then he came to Adelaide against the pink ball. And you could not admire more the innings of 38. I think it was 38 that he ended up on.
End of night one.
Playing that really tough, gritty knock under lights at Adelaide.
I'll jump in. Your point's really well made, because it was Travis who then came in, instead of batting late on day 1 in those really difficult conditions, came in with the sun out on day 2 and a 20-over-old ball and made 140 and played one of the defining knocks of the series.
And you're right. And to be fair, that was the Australian game plan, was to see off the new ball and get Travis in over 30, 40, so that he could come in and just tear it up. Now, that was the game plan for the first 3 games. They decided to throw something different, and I completely understand it worked. It was really a defining knock from Constas in that Boxing Day test. But, I look at Nathan McSweeney. He's not an opening batter. I think he did a serviceable job for what the game plan was at the time. He's not an opening batter. He's a number 3, maybe even a number 4. But I think that Australian number 4 role will either be Steve Smith or Cameron Green longer term. So I look at the current setup and I go, well, Khawaja, he's obviously coming off a great series in Sri Lanka. I feel like it'll be the end for him after the Ashes series. I think that will see him through. I see Marnus as taking over that role. I think if Constas is the heir apparent, once Head goes back down to number 5 for the World Test Championship, I believe that Marnus Labuschagne should open the innings for Australia and then see a Nathan McSweeney in at 3. Or, depending on what they do with Cameron Green, do they have McSweeney down the order a little bit and have Green and Smith followed by, a McSweeney and a Head or whatever way they want to go. The good thing is now we've got options in Australian cricket. Correct. But Nathan McSweeney is every bit I believe the next batter in, and number 3 or 4 would be his ideal spot. So if he's allowed time to settle into a position in the Australian batting order, I believe genuinely he will be the next long-term captain of Australia.
Yeah, your point's well made. We now, as an Australian cricket team, have so many options of guys who can bat within that top 6. And we've certainly done that with spin bowling as well. We've unleashed someone with Matt Kuhnemann, so long as he gets through the checks that he's going to have to undergo with his being reported for what is a suspect action. But I mean, the one concern that Australia does have is, we've got Boland as the obvious replacement if we lose a paceman, but heading towards a World Test Championship and an Ashes next year, that's probably the one area where we've got these 4 aging pace bowlers, and who's the next cab off the rank, and we don't really know that yet. Australia hasn't quite nutted that out. They didn't use anyone in the previous 7 tests before the previous 8 tests. So the 7 tests last year, that was West Indies, Pakistan, and the tour to New Zealand. They used the same 4 bowlers every time. So that's one thing they're going to have to work out. And one thing they did trial, and I'm interested in your thoughts on it, it's not strictly speaking South Australian, although we're potentially going to be running into him down the track. Cooper Connolly batting at number 8 and playing as a bit of a part-time spinner. What did you make of that selection?
I didn't like it at all, Hooky. I like everyone, have seen Cooper Connolly bat in the Big Bash. I've seen him, put up some excellent knocks in his 4 games of first-class cricket. I think he's averaging 60 in first class in his first 4 games. He's made 3 half-centuries. So he is off to an excellent start. They selected him at number 8. He has not taken a first-class wicket. And I can't understand why they would choose to... I mean, I get maybe they were looking to lengthen the batting order and they thought it was going to be a really tough wicket. But, hey, Todd Murphy can hold the stick, and he's also a very, very classy bowler. Todd Murphy's done nothing wrong. He didn't bowl that badly in the first test. He just was the third cab off the rank. Nathan Lyon's the premium off spinner. You've got the left-arm variety of Kuhnemann. Todd Murphy was the third spinner. He wasn't ever going to get that much of a bowl. I thought he bowled well. He bowled that really nice ball to take that wicket in the second innings, first wicket of the innings. Just a nice little slider onto the off stump. He's a young player as well that we need to invest in. So I don't really understand why they needed to make that selection call. I could understand why they took Connolly on the tour as a development opportunity, but I think that was a bit of a silly selection, really. And in hindsight, they'd probably concede that as well. But how good were Bo Webster's offies, though? They didn't even need Connolly to bowl in the end because Webster took a couple. So, yeah, look, I think it was silly, but you live and you learn. To be fair, George Bailey and co haven't got much wrong at this point, even though we keep knocking them and saying, who's next? They haven't got a lot wrong. It's hard to knock.
Yeah, we talk about statues of Shane Warne. Maybe there should be one of Bailey and McDonald for the way they've been able to pick these teams. Webster's interesting. I mean, we're going to be here for hours the way we're going, mate. Webster's a fascinating story. His stats, I think he's the only player in Sheffield Shield cricket to score 900 runs and take 30 wickets in a season, except for one cricketer, Sir Garfield Sobers, who did it for South Australia. And here he is bowling medium pace, some off spin and batting exceptionally as well. And at 31 forced his way into the test team. So it'll be interesting to see his longevity because he's looked the part. The moment he walked in to play that first test at the SCG, he has absolutely looked the part. The Connolly one's interesting to me. The one thing we have said about Bailey and McDonald is that they came so meticulously prepared for this series. And I do feel like Connolly was a bit of a last-minute thought bubble selection. If you actually wanted someone to bowl some part-time off-spin and bat 8 on a wicket that was going to clearly rag, I mean, I would have had Glenn Maxwell in that team, and that would have been my meticulous planning. So the only thing, I didn't mind the concept of picking an extra batter and leaving out a bowler on the strength of the fact that we thought that wicket was going to turn hard very early. But that would have been the ideal spot for Glenn Maxwell, not for Cooper Connolly, would have been probably my only criticism of the way that played out. I didn't mind someone like that filling that role. I just think they had the wrong guy. And if you were really serious about meticulous planning, it didn't matter because Australia got themselves so far ahead of the game anyway. But I would have comfortably said Glenn Maxwell would have been the right fit for that particular job over and above Cooper Connolly. But that's enough about a Western Australian, mate. Let's start talking about the team that just beat them comfortably inside 2 days. Trav, you're a bit younger than me. I remember routinely South Australia going over to Western Australia and the result was done inside 2 days, but normally we'd lost by an innings. Here we are winning by 6 wickets. Incredible performance. South Australia top of the Sheffield Shield, second in the One Day Cup. You think back the last few years and where South Australia has been. So we'll start with the Sheffield Shield. Finished the last 4 years in 5th, 4th, bottom. And in the One Day Cup, second, we lost a final to Western Australia, second, bottom. And here we are top and second. And our women are doing remarkably well as well, which we'll touch on. Can you identify what's changed?
Well, you've got to pinch yourself, don't you, Hooky? It's unbelievable. Do you know, the win against WA brought about the continuation of a sequence that this hasn't happened overnight. This has been a slow build that has happened, and credit, to be fair, needs to go with Tim Nielsen and Jason Gillespie for the time that they actually put in to this program and the patience that they had to stick at it. So I look back to the 2020 season when the South Australia didn't win a game. They got to the end of, I believe it was 2021, and they won the first game in 2 years. And it was huge, or it might even have been 21-22. But since then, since that win against New South Wales, which was actually, and I'll get to this later, but it was the last time we won a game at Karen Rolton Oval, which we'll have to, if we end up hosting a final, that's where we'll be hosting it.
Agree.
But what has happened since then? So that was one win in that season. Then they went, you talked about ladder positions, but they've gone 1 win, 2 wins, 3 wins. And then this season, this was their 4th win on the weekend. So now that they've got 3 games to spare, so let's hope that they can drive that home and really, really build on the start they've made. They've got 2 teams. They played Tasmania and Queensland in the last, albeit they both won on the weekend, in saying that they would back themselves hosting those fixtures here in Adelaide. One of them's at Adelaide Oval. I hadn't actually looked at which one was. One of them's at Karen Rolton, one of them's at Adelaide Oval.
Exactly, yes.
That's the interesting bit of it, and I mentioned that just off the top there. We haven't won at Karen Rolton Oval in 3 years. If we end up hosting the final, which we're a game clear, more than a game clear, in fact, at the top of the ladder, if we end up hosting there, we're going to have to learn how to win the game.
Some inside baseball here, Trav. I'm pretty certain that not every one of the wickets at Karen Rolton Oval is a drop-in wicket. I think there are some of the more traditional wickets, which I reckon if you are going to host a final, you would play on and make sure it is absolutely the flattest thing you have ever seen in your life. Just bring a draw in as a potential result. I mean, Karen Rolton Oval over 5 days, which the Sheffield Shield final is, on one of those drop-in wickets, that's going to be a win or a loss. That would be my strong recommendation to our good friends at the South Australian Cricket Association. Trent Kelly, of course, the head groundsman there. But now I don't know the numbers. I think there's 6 wickets in that square. I reckon either 2 or 4 of them. I reckon 4 of them might be drop-ins and the other 2 might be the old traditional square wickets that are in there the whole time. And, gee, I'd be thinking about using one of them.
Oh, you'd have to. But do you know what? The game that we played early this season against New South Wales, that was a pretty flat deck. Jackson Bird just bowled line and length and 7 for and absolutely destroyed us. And it was our first innings, so he made the most of the conditions. We got bowled for 110. We were never in the game after that. I think New South Wales went on to make nearly 400, and that was all she wrote. So I hope that there's no inner demons hiding there. There's still a long way to go for them to even host the final. So they still need a win. I think one win, you still obviously need other results to go your way, but essentially one win out of the 3 games should see them in the final, which is amazing turnaround from where we have been in the depths of despair here in South Australian cricket for 30 years, mate.
2 wins will undoubtedly mean that South Australia hosts it. 1 win gets you in. Maybe you're playing away, which is obviously a different kettle of fish. Hey, I was thinking about this on the back of Nathan McAndrew, who has had an unbelievable year, 28 wickets in the Sheffield Shield now, took 7 for 11 in the second innings against Western Australia on the weekend. He's in the market for who South Australia's most influential player is. I've got a bit of a smoky here. Who do you think has been our key player this year?
Oh, well, I mean, I had McAndrew. I just think he's been exceptional, and he's been doing it for the whole time he's been at South Australia. So he came across in 2021. He's taken 131 wickets at 23 in that time. Now, not only that, his contributions with bat in hand have been outstanding, as well as, has been a trademark of a few of our wins over the last few years, is that we've actually had lower order resurrections from the types of Ben Menenti, Nathan McAndrew, Liam Scott. So it's these kind of knocks that have, he's actually had some match defining moments with the bat in hand as well. So I can't go past him. Interested to know who yours is, though.
Well, I don't think I can back it up with any sort of statistical evidence right now, but I just reckon the influence that Jason Sanger is having around that team is a little bit more profound than perhaps what the numbers are showing. So Nathan McAndrew, I get it. He was man of the match in that last Sheffield Shield game, 7 for 11. You're going to do that. But in really difficult conditions, you have a look at Sanger's 2 innings. I think he had 40 in the first innings and 20-something not out in the second innings. And the ball he got out to in the first innings was one of the great brute deliveries you have ever seen. He's peeled off 100 for South Australia. If his arm, he has that sort of shoulder elbow type issue that I know has curtailed him a bit, certainly in the Big Bash and towards the end of the first half of the domestic summer. But, gee, I like him. I reckon he has been a profound influence around the group. And I expect in the last 6 weeks of the year that he is going to stand up. So I just want everyone to keep an eye out for Jason Sanger, what he is doing without necessarily being the best man. But I reckon, get him into a Shield final and he could be someone who really does some damage for us. I tell you what, who else I love? I reckon I'd hate to play against him, but I love him in the team, is Ben Menenti. He doesn't mind getting some dirt under his fingernails. He doesn't mind stirring up opposition sides. Pressuring umpires, I don't know that I'm that comfortable with, but he's just that sort of guy that I reckon brings the group along.
Yeah, he is, and he's got that dog in him, as they say. And he's been a fighter, an absolute fighter in that side since he came in as a bowler. But he's turned into a genuine all-rounder, and he is amazing in the field as well. That, like, in that first slip position, he has made that his own, and he's taken some absolute corkers over the year, and his leadership has grown. I don't think if you'd been around the group 2 or 3 years ago when he came in, I'm not sure that leadership was on his agenda, but he's done a sensational job as the stand-in skipper, and he's continuing to grow. So good on him. He's a great bloke as well, and hopefully he obviously McSweeney will come back in and take that captaincy, but he'll continue to lead, and I think it'll be better for the experience.
Trav, we're not even going to get to local cricket, which is unfortunate. I'd love to catch up with you again in a couple of weeks' time, maybe, and just talk about that as we sort of head towards the finals. I just want to touch on the women who, they'd lost 4 of their last 5. What an important victory that was over there against New South Wales at Cricket Central. We looked a little bit undermanned when all of the Australians were out, and of course Gemma Barsby suffered an injury, but they've just righted the ship back into second. Who knows? We could see multiple titles for the South Australians this summer.
Oh, that would be nice. And I couldn't actually think of a more deserving group than our South Australian women's side, because they work so hard. They're so well connected, and they've been around. I mean, they had an off season last year, but they've been so close. We won't even talk about that final a couple of years ago against Tasmania. But honestly, they made a really important change. And I think this says a lot of Bridget Patterson's leadership. She's in as the stand-in skipper currently, with Jem Barsby out of the side with a hip injury. Now, she shifted herself down the order. She was opening. She looked out of sorts. Those games against Queensland, she didn't look anywhere near it, and made the move down the order, and it ended up being a match-defining knock. Now, Ellie Johnston went to the top of the innings. Didn't work out for her in that last fixture against New South Wales, but she's shown this season when she has stepped into that opening role that she can do it, and do it well. So I think that's going to be a really good change. I'm wondering if they'll stick with that. It was the recipe for success in this past fixture, so hoping that it will. But who I'm absolutely loving the work of at the moment, Hooky, and it's Courtney Neal. She has played about 15 games, but she's been the senior figure in that side because there's been so many injuries to our bowling lineup. And Eleanor LaRose has been overplaying with the Australian under-19s. But Courtney Neal's come into her own, and her performance the other day, 2 for 30 off 10 overs, 2 maidens, which you hardly ever see in white ball cricket these days. She's really stepped up to the plate. She's only 25 years old, and there's a few younger ones under her.
No, all very good points. I mean, we've got some kids, Eleanor LaRosa, as you mentioned, Emerson Filsell, Ella Wilson. So fast bowling stocks looking very good. Your point is just perfect about Bridget Patterson. I think when you're the stand-in captain and the senior player, she's the wicket keeper, and she wanted to open the batting as sort of a bit of a sense that I'm here to lead. But sometimes you just got to trust other players, don't you? And I think it was admirable of her to say, okay, I'm going to give myself a bit of a breather. They've chased every game, the last 5 games. And so to say, righto, well, I'm going to keep first, give myself some time off, and then played that really important innings. Augurs very well for the South Australian team, who sits second. Have got some massive matches coming up. Trav, so good, mate. That was about triple the time that I was hoping you would invest with us, and I've just kept using you up. Great chat, so interesting. We didn't even get to local cricket, and there's so much to talk about there, so maybe we'll try and hit you up again in the next couple of weeks, but we really appreciate your time on Hooked on Sport.
Mate, absolutely loved it. We'll come on and chat with you anytime, mate.
Go for it, Trav. Good on you. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Hooky, obviously we've got LIV Golf this weekend, which no doubt you'll be heading along to, but really keen to know if there's anything else that's caught your eye that you're going to catch up with this weekend.
Well, Pennant Golf has started for the men, about to start for the women, so we might spend a little bit of time focusing in on that in the next couple of weeks. And we've got some local tennis club finals that begin next weekend as well. So when I say next weekend, I'm talking a couple of weekends' time, sort of that period of the the 28th, 1st and 2nd of March. I mentioned Glen Lee a little bit earlier, which is the club that young Sarah Mildren plays for. They're going for their 6th straight title in the women. So, yeah, lots to be excited about. Cricket finals closing in, and, it's not going to be long, and the footy season will start as well. So it never ends, Wallace.
No, and how's your preparation for your marathon going?
Yeah, another solid week. It's Thursday today. I imagine people will be listening to this on a Friday, and I'll be trying to squeeze a long run in somewhere on the Friday. So I've just started adding a little bit of speed work to my base training.
Yeah.
Most of my running training has been sort of slow and steady. I did a little bit of faster stuff yesterday in the really hot weather. So that was crazy / brave / stupid. But no, I feel like I'm going okay, still injury-free, feel like I'm improving bit by bit. So yeah, for someone who's 6 months out, I feel like I'm in the right part of the world.
Fantastic. Great stuff.
Oh,
Hooky.
and I added a new pair of shoes as well, Wallace.
Oh, brilliant.
How exciting is it when you add a new pair of shoes?
Did you go and get them fitted somewhere?
Well, I didn't actually. This was a voucher. I would recommend getting them fitted. We talk about that in the coming weeks, I reckon. But yeah, isn't it just nice when you put on a new pair of shoes anyway?
Anything new. I reckon you probably went faster. Well, actually you did. You did sprint training, so well done you.
Wasn't sprint training, I can assure you with that. I snuck in under 5-minute Ks for a period of time.
Well done. Great, Hooky. Look forward to catching you next week.
See you, mate.